There is a strange case from a quiet American town that still unsettles anyone who hears it. It began with a woman who walked into public one morning and made a claim so disturbing that people felt a cold shock move through them. She said something no one should ever say about themselves, and every detail that followed made her words harder to dismiss. Soon, the town was forced to face evidence that did not fit normal life or normal explanations. This story grows darker with every step. If you're watching this, please like the video and subscribe. The woman at the center of this case did not stand out before any of this happened. She lived a simple life, kept a simple routine, and rarely caused attention. That is why her sudden claims spread so fast across the town. People were not prepared for something so strange from someone so ordinary. Early one morning, she appeared at a community building and made a statement that would unsettle everyone who heard it. She said she had already attended her own funeral the night before. The words did not come from fear or confusion. They came from a place that seemed calm, as if she was describing an event that had happened exactly as she remembered it. The more she repeated it, the more people stepped back, unsure how to process what she had said. A funeral is meant to be the final moment of a life, not something a living person remembers as a real event. Her claim moved through the town quickly. Older residents who heard the first version thought she might be confused or having some kind of episode, but younger people felt something different. They said her tone was too steady. They said her eyes were too clear. It was not the voice of someone who imagined something. It was the voice of someone reporting a real experience. Soon, people gathered around her, asking what she meant, trying to understand what exactly she had seen or felt. Even without using dramatic words or emotional gestures, she created a level of tension that made people feel uneasy. Her presence became the center of attention because the situation made no sense. It challenged every simple idea of life and death. As the day continued, the woman did not change her story. She did not add new parts or mix events. She simply repeated the same thing, that she had been at her own funeral the night before. She had no reason to lie. She had no history of odd behavior. She had never tried to gain attention. For years, she had lived quietly. And suddenly, she was describing a moment that should have been impossible for her to witness. Local staff who were present said the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the building itself had shifted. People started to ask one another whether something unusual had happened in the town during the night, something they had missed, something that might explain her disturbing report. The woman herself did not look sick or distressed. She looked tired, but not in a way that suggested confusion. Her appearance made the situation worse because she looked too normal. Her hair was neat, her clothing was clean, and she seemed aware of everything around her. Nothing about her suggested illness. Her clear state made people more anxious because her claim could not be dismissed by a simple explanation. People who worked with local records wondered whether there had been a funeral for someone with the same name, but that idea did not fully help. The woman insisted the funeral she attended was meant for her and no one else. People across the town started to talk about past strange cases. They wondered if this could be related to a medical issue, a sleepwalking condition, or a dream so vivid that it felt real. But none of those ideas explained the calm way she described it. Older women in the town, especially those in their 60s and 70s, whispered about experiences they had heard in their youth, stories of people seeing their own bodies in dreams, or hearing their own names in ceremonies that had not happened yet. These were old superstitions, passed down from generation to generation, and mostly ignored in modern life. But suddenly, those old stories felt close again. By the afternoon, people wanted authorities to check on her, not because she seemed dangerous, but because they felt something beyond normal understanding had touched her life. A few people believed she had suffered a mental break. Others believed she might be warning them of something. A smaller group began to fear she might be telling the truth in a way no one wanted to consider. It is one thing to hear a strange rumor. It is another to watch a person calmly state something that breaks the rules of nature. Later that day, the woman gave more information that would make the situation even worse. She said she remembered the funeral clearly, as if it were not a dream, not a vision, not a feeling, but an event she physically walked through. She remembered the setting, the people, the sounds, the environment around her. These details were shared with the same steady voice she had used from the beginning, which only magnified the tension. If she had cried or panicked, people might have dismissed the story, but because she remained grounded, the fear grew stronger in those who listened. A calm person describing an impossible event carries more weight than someone shouting wild claims. As the first day of this case ended, the woman had not changed her claim, and the town had not settled its nerves. Questions grew, and answers did not come. The disturbing part was not simply what she said, but the certainty in her voice. It was the kind of certainty that made people feel the ground beneath them was less stable than they thought. It made the town fear that something hidden, something they had never seen, might be unfolding around them, and that this woman was the first sign of it. What unsettled the town even more was how the woman began to describe the funeral she claimed to attend. At first, people thought she would speak in vague terms, like someone recalling a dream or a blurred memory. Instead, she spoke with clear, steady detail, the kind that made listeners feel a slow chill rise up their spine. She described the setting as if she had walked through it step by step. She mentioned the color of the chairs, the way the air smelled, and the sound of soft footsteps touching the ground around her. The details were not dramatic or emotional. They were plain, simple, and direct. That made them even harder to ignore. She described the hymns she heard, not by name, but by the melody and how slow they felt. People in the town noted that she did not use poetic language or long descriptions. She spoke in short, basic sentences, the way someone would talk after watching something real happen. She explained where she stood, where the other people gathered, and the way the room was arranged. Her description created a picture that felt too exact for an imagined event. Older women who listened said she spoke with the tone of someone who had been there physically, not mentally, drifting through a thought or dream. One troubling detail was how she described the people who cried. She did not know who they were. She said some faced the coffin, while others sat with their heads down. She described their clothes and the movement of their shoulders, which rose and fell as if they were mourning someone they truly knew. What made the town uneasy was that these people did not fit the profile of anyone related to her. She lived alone. She kept to herself. She did not have many family members, and the few she had were no longer alive. Yet she described a room full of people acting as if they had lost someone close to them. Another detail she gave involved the coffin handles. She described the pattern on them, which she said was simple but unusual. The way she explained it matched the kind of detail someone would notice only if they stood close enough to touch it. She explained the size, the shine, and the shape. People listening wondered why she would focus on something so specific unless she had actually been near the coffin. Her calm tone and exact recall made the detail feel sharp, like a piece of a larger truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. She also described the lighting in the room. She said the lights were dim, not because the bulbs were weak, but because the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the room itself held a weight. She spoke about the shadows on the walls and how they shifted when someone walked by. These were not the kind of details someone invents easily. They were the kind that come from a real memory, the kind that sit in the mind long after the event has ended. People who listened to her began to argue quietly among themselves. Some said she had to be mistaken. Others said she might be remembering a funeral she had attended long ago for someone else. But she was firm in her claim. She said it was her funeral, not someone else's. She made no attempt to soften the statement or change it for the comfort of others. This gave her story a weight that made people uneasy. When someone is desperate or confused, they often try to justify themselves or seek reassurance. She did not. She simply told the facts as she remembered them. By midday, people began calling one another, telling relatives and friends about her strange memory. Some said she spoke with too much clarity. Some said she was too calm for someone describing something so disturbing. A few older listeners began whispering comparisons to old stories they heard from their grandparents, stories of people who saw visions of their own deaths or attended ceremonies meant for them. These were old folk beliefs usually ignored, but now they drifted back into conversation. Her detailed description created an emotional tension in the town. It made people question their own ideas of what is possible. The fact that she remembered specific sounds added to the unease. She talked about the creaking of the floor beneath the feet of the mourners, the shifting of a chair as someone sat down, and the faint rustle of fabric as people moved. These were small details, but they painted a scene that felt real and grounded. What troubled the authorities was how steady she remained throughout the description. She showed no panic. She showed no confusion. She did not try to convince anyone she was telling the truth. She simply stated what she remembered in the same simple tone she had used all morning. This frightened people more than any dramatic behavior would have calmness in the face of something impossible, made the situation feel heavier. By the end of the day, the woman had given a full, detailed account of the funeral she believed she attended. The town had no explanation. The authorities had no report that matched her claim. Yet the woman continued to describe the event as if it were a real, physical memory. She listed each detail with the steady confidence of a person who had seen it with their own eyes. And with every detail she shared, the town felt itself pulled deeper into a mystery it could not escape. The situation changed from strange to deeply unsettling when the woman brought forward an item that no one expected, a printed funeral program with her own picture on the cover. Up until that moment, people had been unsure whether her descriptions came from a dream, a memory error, or something she imagined with unusual clarity. But when she held out the program, the room grew still. The paper was real. The ink was real. The photograph on the front was undeniably hers. It was not an old picture or a blurred image pulled from a forgotten photo album. It was recent, taken within the last few months, showing her in a simple top, standing in front of her own front door. The details were too exact to dismiss. Even the date printed under her name matched the day she claimed she attended the funeral. It said she had died only hours before she made her claim. The program was simple, printed on thin, standard paper, the kind used for small local services. The design was not fancy. It had her name, her photograph, and a short list of events: viewing, service, and burial. It listed a time and location that matched a community hall only a few miles from where she lived. There were no spelling errors, no missing letters, no signs that it had been made in a hurry. People stared at it because it looked official. It was the same format the town had seen many times at funerals for friends and neighbors. It carried the same weight, the same tone, the same layout. No one could understand how such a thing could exist if she was standing right there, alive and talking. When she handed the program to local staff, they examined every part of it. They checked the paper. They checked the alignment of the text. They checked the date and the small print at the bottom that showed the name of a local printing service the town had used for years. Everything looked normal, which was the most disturbing part. If the paper had been torn, stained, or printed unusually, people might have believed it was a prank. But it looked exactly like the programs made for real funerals, created for real families, dealing with real loss. The woman did not offer any emotional explanation. She did not say she found it somewhere strange. She did not say someone gave it to her. She simply said it came from the funeral she attended. Her expression did not change as she said this. She did not panic or show distress. Her calmness made the program feel heavier in the hands of the people examining it. They flipped through all the pages, expecting to find something written in a strange way, but each section looked familiar. It listed a short message about remembering her life. It included a simple poem she had never seen before. It even listed pallbearers, names the town did not recognize. The inclusion of unknown names raised more questions. If this program belonged to a real event, who were these people chosen to carry her coffin? Why had no one in town heard of them? Why were they listed as if they had known her well? The names were not tied to any family she had ever mentioned, nor any neighbors she interacted with. People wondered if they were made up, yet the program listed them in a direct, organized format that did not look random. Each name appeared in an order that suggested planning, not improvisation. Local authorities considered the possibility that the program had been stolen from somewhere. They wondered if someone might have created it as a cruel trick. But even that theory did not make sense. No one could name a person who would go through the trouble of staging a fake funeral program with that much detail. No one had any reason to target her. She lived quietly, had no serious conflicts with anyone, and rarely drew attention to herself. She was not the type of person someone would prank. There was nothing in her past that could explain why such an object would exist. The printing shop, listed at the bottom of the program, was another source of concern. People noted that if the program were real, it would mean the shop had printed it, yet the shop had not received a recent order under her name. This contradiction pushed the town deeper into confusion. If the shop had no record of printing the program, then who did? If no one in the town submitted the order, where did it come from? And if no one created it locally, how did it end up in her hands? The deeper authorities looked, the more they realized the situation had no clear explanation. The paper was the same type sold at the local office supply store. The print looked like the style used by the shop. The layout matched other known programs. Everything about it matched real life. Yet every logical step led to a dead end. By the end of the day, the funeral program became the strongest piece of physical evidence in her claim. Her words were strange, but the paper made them harder to dismiss. It was no longer a simple story of a woman claiming a strange memory. It was now a case with an object that should not exist. That one item held more weight than anything she had described before. It suggested planning, preparation, and intention. It suggested that someone, somewhere, had created a funeral for a living woman and expected no one to question it. The town had seen odd things over the years, but nothing that took a normal object like a funeral program and turned it into a clue for something much darker. With every person who touched it, the same uneasy thought grew stronger. If this paper was real, then the funeral it described might also have been real, and if the funeral was real, then the woman standing before them was not just confused. She might have walked into a ceremony meant to bury her before she ever had the chance to understand why. The turning point in the case came when the woman guided authorities to a local cemetery and walked with a steady, purposeful pace toward a specific section near the back fence. She did not hesitate or wander. She moved as if she knew exactly where she was going, even though she rarely visited that cemetery and had no known reason to go there regularly. The officers accompanying her noted that she did not pause to look around or search for familiar landmarks. Instead, she moved with the confidence of someone retracing steps already taken. Her calm behavior made the situation tense because it did not match the fear a person should feel while approaching a place connected to their own supposed death. When she reached the far corner of the property, she pointed to a recently dug plot. The ground looked disturbed, the soil loose and uneven, as if someone had worked there only hours earlier. People who saw it said the dirt had the color and texture of fresh digging. The tools used had left clear marks, and the shape of the plot matched the size of a standard grave. But the most disturbing detail was the object leaning against a temporary wooden marker placed at the head of the plot. A small photograph of the woman herself. It was the same picture used on the funeral program she had shown earlier. The edges were clean. The print was smooth. It looked new, not weathered. Someone had pinned it there with a small metal clip, the kind used for quick identification before a permanent gravestone is ordered. The officers examined the soil more closely. They noted the depth of the digging, the sharp edges along the sides of the plot, and the compacted layer near the bottom that suggested the digging had been intentional, not casual or shallow. This was not a hole made by animals or heavy rain. It was shaped exactly like the early stage of a burial site. The size and outline matched funeral standards used across the region. The officers also noticed that the dirt around the plot was scattered unevenly, consistent with someone working at night. The lack of footprints near the edges suggested whoever prepared the ground had been careful. The temporary wooden marker itself was simple. Plain wood with no carved name, only a space where the photograph had been attached. It matched the kind used for graves waiting for permanent markers, which are usually ordered after a service. The placement of the marker was neat, straight, and intentional. Nothing about it looked rushed. The photograph pinned to it made the scene feel too real. It tied the entire claim to something physical that could not be ignored. For many onlookers, this was the moment when the story shifted from rumors and confusion to something darker. Authorities questioned whether the plot had been arranged by cemetery workers, but the staff on duty denied digging any new graves in that section. Their records confirmed no scheduled burials for that night or the following morning. No paperwork matched the woman's name. No funeral had been arranged for her. This contradiction left everyone unsettled. It was impossible to understand how a grave matching her funeral program existed without anyone in the cemetery staff knowing about it. While the officers examined the plot, the woman stood a few steps back. She did not cry or panic. She simply observed the area with a tired expression, as if the place confirmed something she already knew. Her calmness became the most disturbing part again. She did not treat the spot with fear or shock. She looked at it the way someone looks at a place they have already visited. People watching her from a distance whispered to one another. Some believed she might have sleepwalked there during the night. Others believed she was witnessing something done without her knowledge. A few older residents began to consider the possibility that she had been brought there by someone else, someone whose identity remained hidden. Officers took pictures, measured the ground, and documented every feature. They examined the edges of the plot closely. The shape matched professional digging. It did not look like the work of inexperienced people. This led to more questions. If the grave had been prepared professionally, who contacted the diggers? If no one contacted them, then who did the work? And why was it done without official approval? The presence of her photograph made the officers uneasy. They knew the picture on the funeral program had to come from somewhere. But seeing it pinned at the head of an unrecorded grave turned the case into something far more troubling. It suggested planning. It suggested intent. It suggested that someone had gone through the steps of preparing a burial for a woman who was not dead. Some onlookers quietly noticed how the woman's eyes followed the edges of the grave, as if she recognized the layout. She even pointed out a small detail, a patch of disturbed grass a few feet away. She said it had not looked like that during the funeral she remembered. This comment made officers exchange uneasy glances. If she had never been there before, how could she compare what she saw now to what she believed she saw earlier? By the time authorities finished documenting the scene, the atmosphere in the cemetery had shifted. It no longer felt like an ordinary piece of land. It felt like the center of a mystery, with too many parts already fitting together too neatly. A printed funeral program, a picture of the woman, and a freshly dug grave all pointed to the same chilling conclusion. Someone had prepared a funeral for her, and she had somehow walked away before the burial ever happened. And this discovery was only the beginning. The investigation took a deeper turn when officers began asking the woman to describe the hours before she arrived at the cemetery plot. Up until this point, she had spoken calmly about the funeral she believed she attended, the program she carried, and the grave she led them to. But when the conversation shifted to where she had been during the night, her answers changed. She did not grow emotional or confused. Instead, she explained that she could not account for several hours of her life. She said she remembered leaving her home in the evening to complete a simple task, something routine, something she had done many times before. But after that moment, her memory went blank. She said there was a gap she could not fill, a stretch of time that simply did not exist in her mind. This missing block of hours became the most troubling part of the case, because it suggested that something had happened to her, something she was not able to recall. The officers asked her to describe the last thing she remembered before the blank space in her memory. She said she recalled walking toward her car, having her keys in her hand, and thinking about a small chore she needed to finish. But she did not remember unlocking the door. She did not remember starting the engine. She did not remember driving. She said the next thing she recalled clearly was waking up in an abandoned vehicle parked near the cemetery. This vehicle was not hers. She did not recognize its make, model, or color. She said the interior smelled like old fabric and dust, as if it had not been used for years. She described the feeling of waking up there as cold and disorienting, not because she felt threatened, but because she couldn't understand how she arrived in a place that had no connection to her life. The doors were unlocked, the windows half open, and the keys were not inside. She woke up alone, in silence, with no explanation. The officers who examined the abandoned vehicle later confirmed that it had been sitting in that area for weeks, possibly months. It had no plates. Its seats were worn. Its floor was covered in dirt and dry leaves. There was no sign that anyone had been living in it or using it recently. Yet somehow, the woman had ended up inside it during the missing hours of her night. The officers checked the vehicle for fingerprints, but the results were inconclusive. The dust on the surfaces made it difficult to recover clean prints. Even so, the condition of the interior suggested that someone had placed her there, rather than her climbing in on her own. The driver's seat was pushed back far beyond her height. The glove box had been opened and left ajar. The trunk latch was damaged, as if forced from the inside at some point in the past. These details made the officers uneasy because they did not fit a simple explanation. When the woman woke inside the abandoned vehicle, she noticed dirt under her nails. The dirt was the same reddish color as the soil around the grave. This detail troubled her because she did not remember touching the ground at all. She also said she heard a faint ringing in her ears when she first woke up. It was not loud or painful. It was soft, steady, and constant, like a distant electrical hum. She said the sound faded after a few minutes, leaving her with a heavy silence that made her feel even more disconnected from her surroundings. This ringing became a detail that investigators could not easily explain. It did not match any medical condition she was known to have. It did not match any noise typically heard in that area. It felt like a leftover trace of something that had happened during the missing hours. The woman tried to piece together the gap in her memory, but she could not. She said it felt like the hours had been removed from her mind completely, not blurred or mixed, but erased. She could remember the day before and the morning after with perfect clarity, but the time in between was an empty space. Officers considered the possibility of a medical episode. They wondered whether she had fainted or experienced a moment of confusion. However, the physical evidence did not support this idea. The footprints near the grave, the funeral program, and the abandoned vehicle pointed to involvement by another person. A medical episode alone could not explain how she arrived inside a vehicle that was not hers, or how she ended up near a freshly dug grave marked with her photograph. Witnesses in the area were questioned. No one reported seeing her walking alone. No one saw her near the cemetery. No one saw her near the abandoned vehicle. This absence of sightings made the missing hours even more mysterious. It was as if she had moved through the night unseen. The larger barefoot footprints found beside hers suggested she was not alone during that time, but that raised more questions. Who was the person with her? Why were they barefoot? Why did they move in circles around the grave? Did they guide her there? Did they bring her there unwillingly? And if so, why would they leave her alive? As the investigation continued, the missing hours became a central part of the case. They were the point where something had happened to her, something she couldn't remember, and something the evidence suggested had been planned. The woman's calmness through all of this continued to disturb the officers and the town. She did not try to guess what happened. She did not try to fill the blank space with imagined explanations. She simply accepted the gap, repeating that she had no memory of those hours. This acceptance made the situation feel heavier, as if the truth was something she could sense but not see. By the end of the second day, the officers understood that the missing hours held the key to everything: the footprints, the funeral program, the grave, and the strange claim she made upon waking. Those lost hours were the place where the real story hid, silent and locked away, with no sign of when or if the truth would ever surface. The investigation took a darker turn when officers finally examined the woman's mobile phone. She had mentioned earlier that the device was damaged when she woke in the abandoned vehicle. Its screen cracked and the back casing slightly bent. At first, the officers assumed the damage came from a fall or rough handling. But when they powered it on, they realized the phone held something far more disturbing than a broken screen. Inside the audio files, buried beneath routine recordings and old reminders, was a short voice clip saved automatically during the missing hours. It lasted only a few seconds, but it carried a weight that settled over the room like a cold fog. When officers listened to it, they did not speak. They simply stared at the device, unsure how to process what they heard. The recording began with a soft crackling sound, the kind that comes from a microphone rubbed against clothing or skin. Then, a man's voice entered the audio. His tone was calm, steady, and controlled. He did not sound angry. He did not sound rushed. He sounded like someone giving instructions that he had given many times before. The words were simple and clear. "She's ready. Prepare the service." The sound quality was muffled, but the sentence was unmistakable. It carried the quiet confidence of someone who believed they had full control of the situation. It did not sound like a stranger whispering to himself. It sounded like a message directed at someone else nearby. Immediately after the man spoke, the recording captured a dragging sound, long, heavy, and uneven. It was the kind of noise made when something weighty is pulled across the floor or ground. No voices followed, no footsteps, just the dragging. Then the recording cut abruptly, as if the phone had been moved, dropped, or shut off suddenly. The clip was short, less than 20 seconds, but it was long enough to raise dozens of questions. The officers replayed it several times, each time listening for background noise, wind, or ambient sounds that might identify the environment. But the recording was too isolated. The man's voice sounded close to the microphone, and the dragging sound felt only a few feet away. There was no music, no echo, no indication of where it had been recorded. The woman listened to the clip with the same calm expression she had shown throughout the investigation. She did not react with fear, nor did she recognize the voice. She simply stared at the device, processing the recording in silence as the officers waited. When she finally spoke, her words were simple. She had no memory of hearing that voice, no memory of anyone speaking to her, and no understanding of what the dragging sound represented. This lack of recognition disturbed the officers. If she had heard the voice before, even during a confused or distressed moment, she should have had some emotional reaction. Instead, she listened as if hearing a stranger's voice on a distant radio. Officers began to analyze the recording for clues. They considered whether someone might have staged the clip, but the timing did not match. The file had been created during the missing hours, saved automatically by the phone's sound detection feature, not manually recorded. This meant the phone had captured the audio on its own when it detected noise above a certain level. The file metadata confirmed the timestamp. It aligned almost exactly with the period in which the woman had no memory. This connection made the recording impossible to dismiss. Technical staff replayed the dragging sound repeatedly. Some thought it resembled the scraping of a wooden object across a hard floor. Others said it sounded like dirt being shifted under weight. Because the recording was short, each theory remained uncertain. The lack of echo suggested the location was not inside a house or large building. The absence of background noise suggested the area was quiet and open. This narrowed the possibilities to a few places: a shed, a small structure, or an outdoor environment. But without visual evidence or a longer clip, the officers could not confirm the surroundings. The most unsettling part of the audio was the tone of the man's voice. His calmness suggested he was not acting impulsively. He sounded as if he had planned something, prepared for something, and knew exactly what would happen next. The phrase "prepare the service" connected directly to the funeral program, the grave, and the woman's strange belief. It suggested coordination. It suggested intent. It suggested that the funeral she claimed to attend may not have been a dream or illusion, but something orchestrated. The recording also raised questions about the barefoot footprints found near the grave. If the unknown person walking around the plot was the same person from the audio, why had they been barefoot? Why had they circled the grave? And why had they been so close to the woman during her missing hours without her remembering any of it? Investigators considered the possibility of another person being involved, someone who worked with the man in the recording. The phrase "she's ready" implied that something had been done to the woman, possibly during the missing hours. The fact that she woke in an abandoned vehicle suggested transport. The dirt under her nails suggested she had been near the grave. The footprints suggested physical presence. The recording linked everything together. By the time the officers finished their analysis, they understood that the audio file was not a stray sound or accidental recording. It was evidence. It was a piece of the puzzle that confirmed someone else had control over the events of that night. It showed intention. It showed planning. It showed that the woman had not been alone, and that someone had been preparing something long before she woke. And while the officers could not yet explain the meaning behind the recording, they knew one thing with certainty. Whatever happened during her missing hours was not random, and the truth behind the recording would only lead the case into deeper darkness. The next development in the case came from an unexpected source: people who had known the woman during her early years. As news spread across the town and into neighboring communities, individuals who remembered her childhood began contacting authorities to share fragments of old memories. At first, the officers did not pay much attention, assuming the calls were little more than community curiosity. But as more people came forward, a pattern appeared. Several older residents, people who had lived in the area for decades, mentioned something unusual from her early life. They said there had once been talk of another child in her family, a second girl, someone who looked just like her. It was not a rumor that circulated widely, and it was not something most people had heard directly. Instead, It lived in quiet remarks, whispered moments, and vague recollections. These memories suggested that the woman might have had a twin sister who vanished in childhood. Officers were cautious with this information, aware that memories from decades earlier are often unreliable. People confuse events, exaggerate details, or blend memories of different families. But the number of individuals who mentioned a second child made the theory difficult to dismiss completely. Some recalled hearing that the family once had two girls who looked almost identical. Others said they remembered neighbors mentioning the difficulty of telling the two apart. A few said they had seen the two children once or twice in passing, though none could confirm it with certainty. The most consistent detail was that the second child, if she existed, had disappeared at a very young age. The reasons varied depending on who was telling the story. Some claimed the child had died from illness. Others said she had been sent away to relatives. A few whispered that the family never spoke of her again, as if the subject had become taboo. The woman herself had no memory of another child in her family. She said she had always believed she was an only child. Her parents had never told her otherwise, and nothing in her upbringing hinted at the existence of a sibling. There were no photographs, no documents, no stories passed down. Her parents had lived simple, private lives, keeping much of their personal history hidden even from close friends. When officers asked her about the possibility of a twin, she responded with the same steady calmness she had shown throughout the case. She said she had never heard such a thing and could not imagine why her parents would hide it. This lack of recognition made the theory more complicated. If a twin did exist, why had the woman never been told, and why had the memory been erased so thoroughly from her family history? Investigators dug into old records, hoping to find some confirmation. Birth certificates, medical documents, school registrations, anything that might reveal another child. But the records from that time were incomplete. Many documents had been lost, damaged, or poorly stored. The only clear record they found was the woman's own birth certificate, which listed her as the sole child born that day. No second entry appeared. This contradiction confused the officers further. How could so many older residents remember a second child if no record existed? Were they mistaken, or had something been hidden deliberately? The whispers about a forgotten twin gained new weight when linked to the evidence found earlier. The footprints around the grave, the calm male voice in the recording, the funeral program created with precision, and the grave prepared without official approval. The idea of two identical women walking together suddenly connected to the possibility of a twin. If there had been another sister, someone who shared the woman's face, could she have returned years later? Could she have been the barefoot presence circling the grave? Could she have been involved in preparing the funeral? The theory felt extreme, but it fit pieces of the puzzle in ways no other explanation had. Officers then considered the emotional impact of such a possibility. If the woman truly had a twin who had vanished from her life without explanation, the shock of rediscovering her would be overwhelming. But the woman did not react that way. She did not show fear, confusion, or recognition. She listened to the theory with the same neutral expression she had shown throughout the case. This lack of reaction caused tension in the investigation. Some officers believed the woman genuinely did not know. Others believed she might be blocking the memory, either deliberately or unconsciously. A few wondered whether she was hiding something. Yet her behavior did not match someone concealing a deep family secret. She simply seemed unaware of it. The theory also explained the strange clarity with which she described the funeral. If another woman who looked exactly like her had been present, it might explain why the mourners seemed to know the deceased. It might explain the calm organization of the service. It might even explain the dragging sound in the recording. But connecting these pieces required assumptions the officers were not ready to accept without proof. Some older residents, especially women in their 60s and 70s, insisted they remembered seeing two little girls who looked identical. They spoke of a time when families sometimes hid painful events, illnesses, psychological conditions, births that brought shame due to circumstances. They said it was not uncommon for families to erase a child from conversation if something tragic happened. But none of them could explain why no documentation remained or why the family had been so silent for decades. As the forgotten twin theory spread, it added a new layer of fear to the case. If a second woman existed, someone who might share the same appearance, same voice, same physical traits, then the possibility of mistaken identity or intentional deception increased. It also made officers reconsider the CCTV footage they would soon analyze, the footage that would confirm far more than they expected. By the end of that phase of the investigation, the forgotten twin theory was neither proven nor dismissed. It remained in a space between rumor and possibility, held together by memories that were too old to trust and evidence that was too strange to ignore. And while the woman remained calm and steady, the town grew more uneasy, sensing that the story was shifting towards something no one had imagined at the beginning. The investigation reached a critical point when officers collected the CCTV footage from a small convenience shop located near the cemetery's rear entrance. The cameras were old, the resolution low, and the angles limited, but they recorded movement throughout the night. Officers expected to see only shadows or vague shapes, something unclear but harmless. Instead, what they found changed the entire direction of the case. The footage did not show one woman walking near the cemetery. It showed two women moving side by side in the dim light, walking with the same build, the same height, and the same posture. The footage captured their outlines clearly enough to show one disturbing detail. The two figures looked identical. Their hair, their stride, their shape. They matched in a way that made the officers sit in silence as the video replayed on the small screen. According to the timestamp, the footage was recorded during the missing hours the woman could not remember. The video showed the two women walking slowly toward the back gate of the cemetery. The one on the left walked with a steady but calm pace, her steps almost careful. The one on the right appeared to be guiding her, walking slightly ahead, turning occasionally as if checking on her. Even though the lighting was poor, the movements were unmistakably human. Nothing about the behavior suggested confusion or fear. Instead, the two figures moved with quiet purpose, as though following a plan or returning to a familiar place. The officers watched the footage multiple times, each viewing bringing new questions. The woman they had interviewed insisted she had no memory of being near the cemetery until she woke inside the abandoned vehicle. Yet the footage showed her walking on her own 2 feet, moving with awareness accompanied by someone who looked exactly like her. The idea that the second figure could be a random person was impossible. The similarities were too precise. No small-town coincidence could explain two identical women appearing together at the exact location tied to the grave and the funeral program. The next troubling detail came from the way the second woman moved. While the first woman's steps were soft and steady, the second woman's movement had an unusual smoothness, almost too controlled. She walked with confidence, her head moving slightly, as if scanning the surroundings. When she turned toward the camera, the officers froze the frame. Even at low resolution, the shape of her face matched the woman under investigation. The same jawline, the same hair length, the same presence. The only difference was her posture. Straighter, firmer, almost commanding. This single difference created an unsettling contrast. It made the officers wonder whether the second woman was the one in control that night. The video also showed something else. The second figure had no shoes. Her feet were bare, matching the footprints found circling the grave. This detail confirmed that the unknown barefoot person in the cemetery was not a man, not a stranger, and not an intruder. It was the second woman, the one who looked identical to the first. The barefoot prints matched her stride. The looping pattern around the grave made sense only in the context of the footage. The woman in shoes stood back, while the barefoot woman walked around the plot. The old theories of an intruder now seemed weak. The evidence pointed in only one direction. Two women had been present, identical in appearance, each with a different role. The officers then examined the footage frame by frame to determine their behavior. At one point, the barefoot woman placed her hand briefly on the shoulder of the woman in shoes. The gesture was not forceful, but it carried a sense of control. It looked like guidance, not comforting, but directing. In another frame, the barefoot woman turned her head sharply toward the camera, as if aware of being watched. The angle of her chin and the lack of visible fear made the moment even more disturbing. She did not appear startled. If anything, the stillness of her posture suggested she expected to be recorded. The footage ended shortly after both figures disappeared behind a row of trees near the cemetery's edge. They did not return on screen. There was no footage of them leaving, no video of them walking along the roads. The cameras facing the main street showed nothing unusual. It was as if the two identical women had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the footprints, the grave, and the broken parts of the woman's memory. The abandoned vehicle where she woke had no nearby cameras, making it impossible to track how she arrived there, or whether the second woman accompanied her. When officers showed her the footage, her reaction was the same calm, steady expression she had displayed at every step of the investigation. She leaned forward slightly, studying the screen, watching the figures move. She did not insist it was someone else. She did not deny the similarity. But she also did not claim recognition. She simply stared and said she had no memory of walking there, and no memory of ever seeing someone who looked exactly like her. This lack of emotion made the officers uneasy. Some believed she was telling the truth. Others believed she was protecting herself from something she did not want to recall. The footage confirmed one undeniable fact. There had been a second woman. Whether she was a forgotten twin, a hidden relative, or someone connected to the funeral plan, no one could say for certain. But she existed. And she had walked with purpose, and she had guided the woman into the night. The discovery forced the town to acknowledge a disturbing possibility, that the story was no longer about mistaken memory or personal confusion. It was about two identical women moving through the darkness together, one fully aware, the other unaware, both tied to a funeral that should never have existed. And the next morning, one of them would vanish. The final and most disturbing turn in the case came the following morning when officers returned to the cemetery to secure the scene. They expected to find the same fresh plot they had documented the previous day. The loose soil, the wooden marker, the clipped photograph, and the indentation of 2 sets of footprints. Instead, they walked into a quiet stretch of land that looked untouched. The fresh grave was gone. The loose soil was gone. The wooden marker was gone. Even the patch of disturbed grass the woman had pointed out was gone. Everything had been restored to an undisturbed, natural state. The ground looked flat, firm and aged, as if nothing had been dug there in months. Officers who had been present the day before could not believe what they were seeing. They walked back and forth across the same area multiple times, kneeling down to check the soil, brushing their hands across the surface, searching for any sign of recent activity. But the earth sat smooth and cold under their fingers. No footprints, no loose dirt, no evidence. The officers began arguing quietly among themselves. Some insisted they had documented the fresh grave with photographs, measurements, and notes. Others said the scene could not simply repair itself overnight. They suspected someone had returned during the night and filled the grave to hide evidence. Yet even that explanation fell apart when they studied the soil closely. The top layer was compacted and aged. The color matched the surrounding ground. The texture was consistent with years of exposure, not hours. If someone had filled the grave manually, the soil would have looked different. It would be uneven, loose, or at least show a shift in color. But the ground showed none of those signs. It looked older than the previous day's disturbed earth, as if time itself had reset the ground. The temporary wooden marker was another missing piece. It had been driven several inches into the soil, placed with intention, and marked with the woman's photograph. It could not have disappeared without leaving at least a dent or impression in the dirt. But the officers found nothing, not a fragment of wood, not a broken clip, not a folded corner of the photograph. The area where the marker had stood now looked like a simple patch of untouched grass. The grass itself had no irregular growth. It stood evenly, as if it had not been bent or flattened by a marker. This created another contradiction. Grass that had been pushed under a wooden stake should show some damage or disruption, but it showed none. As the officers continued to search, they expanded their examination to the surrounding land. They expected to find at least the large barefoot footprints circling the grave, which had been prominent the day before. Those prints were also gone. The dirt that had held the impressions now appeared firm and smooth. The small stones and blades of grass around the area were set naturally, not pushed aside or pressed into the soil. The absence of footprints made the situation feel stranger than ever. It suggested that the ground had either been meticulously restored or had never been disturbed in the first place. The officers knew what they had seen. They knew what they had documented. But the scene now denied every piece of their evidence. The woman stood several steps behind them, watching silently as they searched. Her face remained unreadable. She did not express confusion or anger. She did not try to direct them to the exact location. She simply observed them with the same quiet presence she had shown throughout the investigation. Officers noted her hands were clasped, and her posture remained steady. She looked at the empty ground for a long time, then slowly lowered her gaze, as if recognizing something she could not express. Her calmness made the officers uneasy again. It was as though she had expected the disappearance, as though the vanished grave did not surprise her at all. Some officers questioned whether the previous day's scene had been staged by unknown individuals. They wondered whether a group had dug the grave, placed the marker, and later erased all evidence to confuse the investigation. But this theory had flaws. The amount of effort required to restore the ground so perfectly would take hours. The cemetery had motion sensors along its outer perimeter. None had been triggered during the night. No cameras, even from nearby buildings, recorded any movement. If someone had returned to erase the grave, they had done so without leaving a trace, without disturbing the soil, and without triggering any alarms. This level of precision seemed impossible. The officers then considered whether the fresh grave had been an illusion caused by poor lighting or shadows the previous day. But they dismissed this quickly. Too many people had seen it. Too many had touched the soil. They had photographed it. They had measured it. They had documented the footprints. There was physical evidence recorded by multiple devices. The grave had been real. It existed. The photographs confirmed it. And yet, the earth now denied it. When the officers compared the photographs taken the previous day to the current scene, the differences became more disturbing. In the photos, the soil looked loose and freshly dug. The wooden marker and the photograph were clear. The footprints were distinct. In contrast, the ground before them now looked old, firm, and settled. The two images did not match in any way. The only thing they had in common was the general location. Everything else had changed completely. The officers approached the woman again, asking if she understood what had happened or if she had any memory of events during the night. She responded with the same steady voice she had used from the beginning. She said she remembered nothing new. She said the ground had looked exactly like the fresh grave when she first guided them there. She said she had no explanation for why it was gone now. Her words were simple, but they did not bring comfort. Instead, they deepened the unease. By the end of the morning, the case had entered a place beyond normal explanation. A grave that had existed a day earlier had vanished without a trace. Evidence that had been solid and undeniable had disappeared overnight. A woman who claimed she attended her own funeral now stood in a cemetery that refused to acknowledge the event ever happened. The second woman on the CCTV footage was nowhere to be found. There were no new footprints, no new clues, no signs of struggle or movement. It was as if someone or something had erased the final proof. And when the officers turned back toward the woman to ask another question, they realized something else. She was gone.